This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good afternoon. My name is Stacy Yarber, and I'm the Town Clerk of North Haven. And at this time, my purpose is to open a public hearing as relates to the Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act, which is Connecticut General Statute Sections 12-630 AA to 12-638. This year's applicants are continuing energy conservation improvements for the Moriarty Hall submitted by Landcraft, Fife, and Drum Corp., and financial literacy and workforce readiness for Connecticut youth submitted by Junior Achievement of Southwest New England Incorporated. After this public hearing, the aforementioned programs will be submitted for approval at our special town meeting, which will be held immediately following this public hearing, but no earlier than 6:30. At this time, our first selectman, Mr. Michael Frieda, will come forward to explain the act itself and to give you a better idea of what the Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act entails, and to tell you a little bit about the two applicants this year. Mr. Frieda?
So thank you. This is a standard operating procedure type of portion of this meeting. Every year, one or two organizations come up before the Board of Selectmen and ask for this resolution to be acted on, and under our form of government, it has to be acted on by the town meeting. So what this is essentially is that there is a tax credit provided for businesses who decide to donate to these 501(c) organizations, these nonprofits. So what it is it's a good thing. It's a good thing for the nonprofits to receive the donations from the businesses. The Land, Fife, and Drum organization has been before us for a number of years, at least 10 years that I can remember, and it's good for the businesses who donate because they get a tax credit. And that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Great. At this time, I'd like to open this public hearing for any of your public comments or questions that anyone might have. Does anyone have a question or a comment? Seeing and hearing none, I will adjourn this public hearing, and I will make these minutes available as soon as possible. Again, we cannot start the actual town meeting until at least 6:30, so we will have a small break. At this time, I do conclude this public hearing. Thank you very much. Before we can begin any of the substantive aspects of tonight's meeting, we do have to elect a meeting moderator. The moderator is nominated and elected by the members of our meeting, which are you. It's the moderator's function to bring before the meeting all of the different warnings and to assist in obtaining the objective of the meeting, and to also help with any type of parliamentary procedure. Further, when it's time to vote on any issue, also including the vote upon the moderator, please be aware that you must be an elector of our town to be able to vote tonight. To be an elector of the town, the following are required. The person wishing to vote must have been a registered voter in the town at the time of the most recent election, one who pays taxes to the town on an assessment of property of not less than $1,000 on the most recent grand list, a citizen of the United States and 18 years of age or older. If you're not sure if you're an elector, you can always check with me, and I can check your name on our voter registry. Now, at this time, the floor is open to take some nominations for meeting moderator. Are there any nominations?
I nominate Teresa Villa-Granciata.
Teresa Ranciata-Vili. Is there a second?
Second.
Alrighty, is there any other nominations from the floor? Hearing none, I'll now close the nominating process and put the issue to a vote. All in favor of Mrs. Teresa Ranciata-Vili as tonight's special town meeting moderator, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by saying nay. I now declare Teresa Ranciata-Vili our meeting moderator.
town clerk will now read the call of the meeting.
Thank you. Having received appropriate written notice and warning of the special town meeting and posted same, I hereby convene the special town meeting of the electors and citizens qualified to vote at town meetings pursuant to Connecticut General Statute Section 7-6 for the purpose of considering and voting upon the following 3 items. To ratify and approve the reappointment of Anthony P. Resigno as the North Haven representative to the Representative Policy Board of the South Central Connecticut Water District. Number 2, to consider the approval of requested programs in accordance with the Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act. A public hearing on these programs was held at 6:15 earlier today, and it was required to immediately proceed tonight's special town meeting. Number 3, to consider and discuss the recommendations of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. A, to appropriate $2 million for the milling and paving of town roadways. The project shall consist of milling and removal of waste materials, paving and materials, installation of manholes and drainage risers, traffic protection, including signage and police and flag personnel. The appropriation may be spent for design, demolition, and construction costs, equipment, furnishings, materials, site improvements, survey costs, architect's fees, engineering fees, other consultant fees, legal fees, net temporary interest, and other financing costs and other expenses related to the project. B, to issue bonds or notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $2 million. To provide that the amount of bonds or notes authorized to be issued shall be reduced by any grants received for the project. C, to issue temporary notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $2 million in anticipation of such bonds or notes. D, to determine or authorize the first selectman and the treasurer of the town to determine the amounts, dates, interest rates, maturities, redemption provisions, forms, and other details of the bonds or notes, and to perform all other acts which are necessary or appropriate to issue the bonds or notes. E, to take such action to allow temporary advances of available funds which the town reasonably expects will be reimbursed from the proceeds of borrowings, and to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to bind the town pursuant to such representations and covenants as they deem necessary or advisable in order to maintain the continued exemption from federal income taxation of interest on the bonds or notes authorized by the resolution if issued on a tax-exempt basis, including covenants to pay rebates of investment earnings to the United States in future years. F, to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to make representations and enter into written agreements for the benefit of holders of the bonds or notes to provide secondary market disclosure information, which agreements may include such terms as they deem advisable or appropriate in order to comply with applicable laws or rules pertaining to the sale or purchase of such bonds or notes. And G, to authorize the first selectman, the treasurer, and other proper officers of the town to take all other action which is necessary or desirable to complete the project and to issue bonds or notes to finance the aforesaid appropriation. Dated at North Haven, Connecticut, the 6th day of June 2019.
The town clerk will now read item 1 of the agenda this evening.
So for agenda item number 1 for the evening is to ratify and approve the reappointment of Anthony P. Resigno as the North Haven representative to the Representative Policy Board of the South Central Connecticut Water District.
Okay, for discussion, for this ensuing discussion and any other, everyone who wishes to speak will get a chance to comment before anyone can be called a second time. Discussion right now will be limited to this item only. So is there any discussion to item number 1, Mr. Resigno? Okay. Seeing no discussion, we're going to now vote on the motion. So resolved that in accordance with the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Anthony P. Resigno will be reappointed as the North Haven representative to the Representative Policy Board of the South Central Connecticut Water District. All in favor of item number 1 signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. The town clerk will now read item number 2 of the agenda.
For item number 2, to consider the approval of requested programs in accordance with the Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act. A public hearing on these programs will be held at 6:15 p.m. on Monday, June 17, 2019, in Conference Room 1 of the North Haven Memorial Town Hall, 18 Church Street, North Haven, Connecticut, immediately preceding the special town meeting.
Is there anyone who wishes to discuss item number 2 on the agenda? Item number 2. Okay. We will now vote on the motion. Item number 2, that in accordance with the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, the 2 applicants for the 2019 Connecticut Neighborhood Assistance Act are granted. All in favor of item number 2 signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Town clerk will now read item number 3 of the agenda this evening.
Item number 3, to consider and discuss the recommendations of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. A, to appropriate $2 million for the milling and paving of town roadways. The project shall consist of milling and removal of waste materials, paving and materials, installation of manholes and drainage risers, traffic protection, including signage and police and flag personnel. The appropriation may be spent for design, demolition, and construction costs, equipment, furnishings, materials, site improvements, survey costs, architect's fees, engineering fees, other consultant fees, legal fees, net temporary interest, and other financing costs, and other expenses related to the project. B, to issue bonds or notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $2 million, to provide that the amount of bonds or notes authorized to be issued shall be reduced by any grants received for the project. C, to issue temporary notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $2 million in anticipation of such bonds or notes. D, to determine or authorize the first selectman and the treasurer of the town to determine the amounts, dates, interest rates, maturities, redemption provisions, form, and other details of the bonds or notes, and to perform all other acts which are necessary or appropriate to issue the bonds or notes. E, to take such action to allow temporary advances of available funds, which the town reasonably expects will be reimbursed from the proceeds of borrowings, and to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to bind the town pursuant to such representations and covenants as they deem necessary or advisable in order to maintain the continued exemption from federal income taxation of interest on the bonds or notes authorized by the resolution if issued on a tax-exempt basis, including covenants to pay rebates of investment earnings to the United States in future years. F, to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to make representations and enter into written agreements for the benefit of holders of the bonds or notes to provide secondary market disclosure information, which agreements may include such terms as they deem advisable or appropriate in order to comply with applicable laws or rules pertaining to the sale or purchase of such bonds or notes. And finally, G, to authorize the first selectman, the treasurer, and other proper officers of the town to take all other action which is necessary or desirable to complete the project and to issue bonds or notes to finance the aforesaid appropriation.
Good job. Is there anyone who would like to speak to item number 3 for Selectman Frida?
That's a lot of language, right? So we, by the rules and regulations of the government, have to include and incorporate all that language into any of these type programs. But let me simplify what it all means. It means every year we go out and we try to pave approximately 10 miles worth of roadways. And the approximate cost is $2 million. So what you've heard tonight is a resolution that allows me, based on the vote here tonight, to do what we've tried to do every year for the past 10 years. Now, this particular year, we have a couple of things going for us. The interest rates are dropping. The 2-year Treasury note's about 1.81%, and the town's AAA financial status allows us to borrow at the lowest interest rates possible. So this is a good thing this year. With the approval tonight. Should we get the approval, we will go on a state bid process, which kind of what we've already done. Tilcon usually is on the state bid. Tilcon does both the paving and the milling. The milling, so you know, is the scraping process that's done over the road. Tilcon purchased a company called Costello a couple of years ago, so there was always a large gap between the milling and the roads being corrugated, if you will, and then the paving. The purchase by Tilcon of Costello helps to reduce the time between the milling and the paving. There will always be some sort of time frame between the time the road is milled and then the time the road is paved. So with that being said, if we get the vote tonight to allow me to move forward, we're looking at the first week of July to start moving forward with the paving, and the paving season will be July, August, September, October, into early November. Thank you.
Okay. Would the town engineer like to speak to this now, or would you not like to speak to it?
Let's see what happens.
Okay. Third Selectman Buemi.
Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. First, I think that it's very important that we have projects like this. I know that the townspeople really appreciate the road paving projects, and of course it's important for the survival of our automobiles to have nice and our cars to have nice roads to drive on. So I am supportive in general of the milling and paving that we've done and hopefully will do in the future. And you heard the town clerk mention that the Board of Selectmen has recommended this $2 million bonding project, and that's very true. I abstained from that recommendation, although of course I fully supported this town meeting because I'm hoping that the collective will of the people, after we consider this, will decide the issue. Here's why I was a little hesitant, and it really has to go back about a year. At the March 1st, 2018 Board of Selectmen meeting, I had raised an issue about milling and paving in response to a complaint or an issue that was brought to my attention by a town citizen, retired Officer Stephen Smith, regarding Manor Drive, which was paved in October, early November of 2017. And he came to my office because within about a month of the completion of that paving, he happens to walk there a lot. He counted 45 curb-to-curb cracks in the pavement and asked me to bring it to the attention of the first selectman at a Board of Selectmen meeting. And I did exactly that in March of 2018. And at that meeting, fortunately, the then town attorney, Jonathan Bodwell, was present. And he, in response to me putting this item on the agenda, what did I say? Town attorney, I misspoke, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Bodwell was the town engineer. Thank you, Mr. Frieda. It's been a long day. Yes, Mr. Bodwell, the town engineer, attended that meeting. He acknowledged the cracks, and he explained that they were reflective cracks. Let me just quote first from the minutes. He stated that these were reflective cracks that are due to existing cracks that were in the road underneath the new pavement. He noted when a road has existing cracks, after it is paved, the cracks will resurface. The only alternative is to grind up the entire asphalt and regrade the entire roadway, which is very expensive and not a viable option. Close quote. And if anyone wants to watch this meeting on video, the discussion of the road paving begins around minute 44. And Mr. Bodwell goes on to say that we simply pave right over cracks, and then we wait and then do some crack sealing a year or two later. He wasn't really quite sure why these cracks had developed in just 1 month, and he went on to explain at minute 46 that it might have had something to do with a high water table on Manor Drive. And he also, again, I'm still quoting Town Engineer Bodwell from that meeting. He went on to say that nowadays the life expectancy of a road is only about 10 years, whereas years ago it was 20 to 25 years. And Mr. Bodwell questioned the quality of asphalt nowadays as a potential explanation for the shorter life expectancy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I'm a little concerned, because if these roads are only going to last for 10 years because of the way we're doing it, and we're bonding, which takes 17 years to pay, it begs the question, are there other alternatives? And so I'm very glad that the first selectman, based on my request, agreed to arrange for our current town engineer to be here, because I had one question in particular that perhaps you could address. And again, I fully support, I want to make this clear, I fully support milling and paving and making better roads for our citizens. I just want to do it in the most cost-effective way. So my question has to do with, I've done a little research on this milling and paving in general. My question is about something called SAMI. I don't know if you're familiar, I'm sure you're familiar with it, Street Absorbing Membrane Interlayer, which is a layer of stone about a ½ inch thick that is applied after the milling, but before the asphalt overlay. And the idea is that this will not only help with waterproofing, which I think was one of the issues on Manor Drive down in Monterey's, it could serve as a waterproofing sealant, but the SAMI layer can also absorb stress and potentially reduce cracking. And specifically, from the research that I've done on SAMI, it can reduce reflective cracking, which again, according to town engineer Bodwell, was the main cause of those curb-to-curb cracks over on Manor Drive so quickly after the paving project. So my question is, do you think that we can use this SAMI layer between the milling and the overlay asphalt process? Do you have any idea of its potential cost and what it might do to prolong the approximate 10-year life expectancy to get us at least closer to 17 years, which is, of course, the duration of the bonding. So, or perhaps the town engineer has other ideas of other things that we could do, short of course, reconstruction, which would be grinding down the whole road, and I understand that would be very expensive. But there seems to be other processes that are potential that might help prolong the length of the road, that's also perhaps economically efficient. So I thought perhaps you could address that, sir. Thank you.
Okay, for the record, Andy Bevilacqua, I'm the town engineer. I guess I'd like to kind of start with talking about asphalt itself and pavement and how it works. And the important thing to remember is asphalt is also known as a flexible pavement. So it moves with the base. The most important part is the base material that the pavement sits on. One of the situations that we have, which most towns have, we don't really know the base material is underneath all of our streets, and most of our streets were probably built before the town standards were even established. So you're kind of faced with a situation where the only way to really prevent cracking from happening is, as Mr. Bodwell had said, is doing a full depth reconstruction, which means going out, milling up all the pavement and a portion of the base material below it, to basically reconstruct the entire pavement section. And by doing that, you can assure that you have a good, strong base to start with, so when you put the asphalt on top, the chances of it cracking and having issues are much less. The problem with that is, in comparison with the milling and overlay process that we follow right now, the cost of a full depth reconstruction is 2.5 to could be up to 5 or 6 times what we spend for the roads that we work on right now. So you could just imagine, even at the $2 million level, doing the milling and paving that we've been doing, it's really hard to keep up with the pavement condition. If you were to go with a full depth reconstruction situation, it would prolong that process so much further, and we'd fall much further behind in terms of how this is done. So I'm not a pavement expert myself. I've done a bunch of research on this. I've talked to our vendors and discussed different options that we could potentially have here to help in that situation. One option would be they have a membrane material. It's like a fabric material. You put down a binder course, which is basically a liquid bitumen, and then this fabric material basically gets embedded into the bitumen, and then you pave on top of that. That would increase the cost by about double what we pay right now. So again, you'd be able to do half as many roads. And there's not a guarantee that you're not going to end up with reflective cracking anyway. The problem, again, with asphalt is it's a flexible pavement. It moves. So if there's cracks below it, those cracks have the potential to reflect. So the process that we follow now is we basically mill the gutters. So we mill 6 to 8 feet in from the edge of pavement and take that material out. We leave the center of the road unmilled, and the reason we do that is so that we can create a greater pitch on the road. And a greater pitch on the road allows the water to come off faster. And the faster the water gets off the road, the better it's going to be in terms of pavement life, because water is pavement's worst enemy for the most part. So that's one of the reasons why we do what we do. And then following that, we go back and they put what's called a tack coat. So it's a liquid bitumen material that they spray over the road. And what that does is it helps to bind the new pavement with the old pavement. After that, we do what's called a skim coat. And the skim coat basically comes across the pavement, fills in kind of all the valleys and peaks, and a lot of the cracks that are in the existing pavement. And then we put a finished course on top of that to pave the road and complete it. So that's the process that we've been following. And it's also the process that the majority of towns in the state do. That's just how it's generally done. But again, one of the problems with that is that reflective cracking can come back up again. There is other ways besides the fabric that I talked about where you can do some crack sealing. And the way that would work was you'd go through, after you did your milling work, you'd go through and you'd do a full detailed inspection of the pavement. You'd check all the different locations, you'd find whatever major cracks exist within the pavement, and then you'd provide a seal. And basically it's a hot bituminous material with fibers in it that help to reinforce it. And you basically spread it along that crack, and that helps to join it and it helps to stop the crack. But again, it's not going to be a guarantee. The potential for that cracking to be reflected up is still going to be there. It might be less than it is now, but it's still going to be there. And the cost of something like that, it's about $3.50 a linear foot to do this type of a sealing operation. So that could add $200,000 up to $500,000 to the cost of the overall project. And it all depends on how many cracks you find. The problem with that is that there's no way to predict where that's going to be ahead of time. So in terms of how we budget the job, we don't know what we're going to potentially run into for this crack sealing operation. We won't know that until after the pavement is milled. So you've got to mill the pavement off, then you've got to go back and assess it. You've got to figure out where you need to put this material in and then apply it. The vendors will tell you that there's no guarantees. If you were to do that and spend that money, there's no guarantees that crack isn't going to reflect back up again. Again, the only way that you're going to really be sure to not have that reflective cracking is to just do a full depth reconstruction. So the town's approach for the past 10 years has been to do that milling, to do the paving. Sometimes you're going to end up with reflective cracking that comes back up again. The approach, and I've only been here for, 10 months now, so it's been, I haven't really seen the long-term effects of this. But the concept was, as those cracks develop in that finished course, to go back and do a crack seal on those after the fact. And what that does is that basically seals the top surface. It keeps water from getting into the pavement. And again, water is the enemy because water gets down underneath the pavement, it freezes, and that's what causes the real significant damage to the pavement. So, my recommendation at this point would be to continue to follow the process that we followed, to be sure that we do an inspection on these roads a couple years after they're paved, to identify whatever cracks might come through, and then to address them at that time. If we try to address all the cracks at the milling level, the problem with that is that a lot of those cracks are not going to reflect back up again. So it means you're going to be paying for sealing of many, many more cracks than you would necessarily have to do had you just paved the road. And that's kind of my recommendation as to how we should, continue to proceed. But it is important to do that secondary inspection, because without that secondary inspection, those cracks that have now been created within your new pavement provide a means for water to get down underneath the pavement surface. So having that second level of crack sealing, I think, is very important.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak to item number 3? And we could always call Mr. Bevilacqua back. Okay, Ms. Barrett? Andy, you're going to keep track of the questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Nancy Barrett, Crestview Drive. So it seems to me like it's an economic argument. And it seems like we're trying to say for $2 million, we can mill and ultimately pave X number of roads. And if we do what the town engineer had described was a more thorough job, we will do fewer roads, okay? But what's missing from this economic argument is the cost of the manpower to repair the cracks and potholes that form from doing an insufficient job from the very beginning. So as we all learned as children from our parents, it's better to do it right the first time, right? So as Mr. Frieda has mentioned, his street hasn't been paved in over 20 years. And somehow those streets that were paved 20 years ago are doing very well. Those streets that have been repaved within the last 10 years, not so well. So it begs the question, both the material as well as the process needs to be evaluated. I know on my own street, we've had to have people from the Public Works Department come out 3 and 4 and 5 times just to fill in these giant potholes that have formed over time. Now, our street has not been paved, but there are enormous holes that represent a real risk, not only to kids on bikes, but to pedestrians that are out walking at night. Our street happens to back up to the Ridge Road School, so there are, plenty of people that come there in order to bring their children to and from school. So, in my opinion, I think that it's really worth looking into doing a better job with the money that we are setting aside and perhaps doing fewer roads this time. And one thing that I might suggest in order to compensate for some of the loss in money is perhaps we could use some of the MRSA money from the state to supplement our bond and cover the expenses of paving, which have been mentioned as $200,000 per mile. So perhaps we could apply for state assistance, apply for the Streets and Roads Grant Program, apply for a waiver so that the money that we get from the state could possibly be used specifically for milling and paving. And I would just like to know, as a follow-up question, whether this secondary inspection is actually part of this process. And lastly, I read in the paper recently that our police chief, McLaughlin, has proposed putting in striping on Ridge Road in order to address safety. Well, I happen to live very close to Ridge Road, and if you walk along that street, you can see that at the edges of the street, the thickness of the asphalt varies tremendously. So if you put a stripe in, what purpose does it actually serve? In some cases, it will abut dirt, and in some cases, it might be on asphalt that's 3 inches thick, and in other cases, maybe an inch thick. So if we don't have a uniform road from one curb to the other, or from one side to the other, then I think that it's compromising efforts to try to increase safety as well. So these are my thoughts, and I would just like to be able to say that I think we should try to evaluate this and put it to a vote where we have options A, B, and C. And what are the implications, both dollar-wise and in terms of the number of roads that can be ultimately paved in this particular round with this amount of money. And lastly, I would also like to see, given the number of things that are itemized in, particularly in 3A, I would like to personally see an itemized list of all of these specific expenditures for this project. It seems as though there's a lot more than just the standard milling and paving, but there are other things like other consultants' fees and legal fees and net temporary interest, et cetera. So ultimately, if we go forward with this project in any way, shape, or form, once it is completed, I would like to be able to see some sort of financial description of this is how our tax dollars were spent. Thank you so much.
Amanda?
Amanda Gabriel, 18 Renee Lane. Mr. Bevilacqua, thank you for coming out tonight. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you. Hi. I have 4 questions for you. Is 10 years of life reasonable to assume for a newly paved roadway? That's 1. And then 2 is, how many miles of road are in North Haven? Should we expect that all roads will be repaved within the 10 years that we've kind of talked about? 3 is, are other towns facing the same issue that we're facing and grappling with the same things? And 4 is, reflective cracking, is it cosmetic or is it a safety issue?
Okay. Mr. Katz?
Is Mr. Belleville going to ask a question?
He's keeping track, yeah.
Good evening, Sherman Katz. Sherman Katz, Sherwood Drive. In past years, I've always gotten a list of the roads that were going to be paved during that program. And I have to say that I don't always agree with the roads that were done. I think there were some roads that were paved that didn't need it, and some that needed it didn't get it. The reflective cracking, I've looked into that a little bit, and I was told that the membrane should lengthen the life of the road. I'm not an expert. People I talked to. The other thing is, do you follow behind the people that do this job and do test borings to see that we're actually getting exactly what we're paying for, exactly the same number of inches that you're supposed to get? Because if you're supposed to get 3 inches and they give you 2, you're not getting what you paid for, and you're not going to get the life of it. The former engineer's not here, so I can't ask that question. But I really think that's something that you should be required to do, is to make sure that we get what we pay for. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak to item number 3? Okay, seeing no hands, would Engineer Bevilacqua like to get up and answer the questions?
Let's see. So let's see. So as far as secondary inspections, I really can't speak to exactly what my predecessor had done in terms of evaluating the roads as they've gone on. It is definitely my intent to do that and to evaluate where we're at and see if there is spot repairs that could be made in terms of cracks and that kind of thing. That definitely is something that I will take care of. There's a question on Ridge Road. Ridge Road is on the paving list, so that is supposed to be milled and paved before any striping's done out there. Any improvements are made from the safety perspective. That would certainly be our intent. You know, there's no sense in doing that and then going back and fixing the road after the fact. So, a lot of those issues should be taken care of. Is 10 years pavement life reasonable? I think it's a reasonable, as far as the roads being serviceable, being usable, not having significant problems. I think 10 years is a reasonable period of time that we can expect the roads to last. They'll last longer than that. I mean, what you got to really understand is that as long as the base material is in decent condition, the pavement is going to be in decent condition. The pavement holds up very well as long as it's well supported, and that's really the bottom line on most of these things. Let's see, miles of town road, 120?
194.
194?
About 130 on the town side.
Right. Right. Do other towns have the same problem? Yeah, I can guarantee you that they do. I've talked to a number of my colleagues in other towns, and it's the same problem. Everybody's dealing with the same sort of thing. And really, the biggest issue is the fact that you got a lot of old roads, and you're doing your best to try to rework them. Now, just because our crack appears in a road, that does not mean that the road has failed. Where you really have big problems is when you see a lot of alligator cracking. So when the road starts to fall apart and you can see, lots of cracks going in both directions, where you can almost pick a chunk out of the road, that's where you really have your biggest problems. A linear crack along the road or horizontally through the road is really not that big a deal, as long as it doesn't get too wide, as long as it doesn't allow too much water to get in, and as long as they're spaced on a decent spacing. It really isn't that big a deal. That's not the failure of the road, that's just reflective cracking. Failure of the road, again, is that alligator cracking type of a situation. And those are really the worst areas to worry about. Is reflective cracking cosmetic or safety? And again, it's really more of a cosmetic thing more than anything else, as long as it's not allowed to get worse, as long as it's not allowed to turn into sort of an alligator crack type of a situation. And what will happen is a small crack will appear, maybe some water gets down into the pavement, gets down into the base material, freezes, and that's where you really have your biggest problems, is when you start getting freeze and thaw cycles and water down into the base. And let's see. Do we follow the paving laws performed? Yes, we have inspection. We have inspection done by our field operations staff. So one of the senior staff from the field operations is out there at all times while the milling and paving operation is going on, to be assured that we're getting what we're supposed to be getting. And we are charged by the ton. Okay, so we're not charged by the square foot. We're charged by the ton, and that tonnage is measured in the truck when it leaves the plant. So what we do is we get slips, we get computerized slips that come from the trucks, and that's how we pay. So, so if let's say they're supposed to be putting 2 inches down and they only have 1.8 inches down, we're paying for 1.8 inches because we're paying for the actual asphalt. But you do have an inspector out there who is keeping after them, watching what they're doing, measuring the depths, making sure that they're putting the tack coat down, making sure that you've got good coverage, making sure that the pavement is done right, making sure that the joints in the pavement come together well, because those are all very important parts of the whole process. So hopefully I've helped to answer some of the questions here.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to item number 3 or have any further comment?
I have a question, if nobody out there has any more. Do you, sir? Sorry.
Yes, come on. You have to come on up to the microphone, please, and state your name and your address.
You can do it.
That's okay.
Hi, my name's Robert Capola, 11 Morning Mist, and my question is for Mr. Bevilacqua. I work a lot of road jobs. I'm a police officer in a different town, and I've seen a process where they mill the road, and then they come over with this propane heated truck that has these platforms, and it actually melts what's left of the milling down to the base. And before they tack it and skim it and then final coat it, I've been told, I've asked construction workers that have done that work, what are they doing? Because it's such a weird looking truck. And they say that it saves the town money by melting the remaining and putting it into the base. Now, I assume if the base isn't good, it's not going to work. But what it does is it takes the remaining asphalt that's there and then melts it into the base, and then they skim it. So I don't know what that process is called. I don't know how much it costs, but the workers that have done that work have told me it saves the town money. So it's just something you may want to look into.
Yeah, I have seen that operation go on. More times than not, it's for a pavement repair more than anything else, because what they can do is they can actually melt the pavement. And one of the problems with, like say, a trench patch, where you dig a trench and then they go back and patch it after the fact, is if they don't seal the top of the trench into the existing pavement, then cracks develop, and water has the potential to get into the pavement from that spot. When they go back with the sealing operation, what it does is just heats the pavement up and melts the pavement into each other. Done after a milling, I mean, that could have some positive benefits. Cost-wise, I'm sure it's going to be very, very expensive. And the thing you got to remember, I mean, we're at over 10 miles for each year that we've been doing this paving. If we talk about doing a lot of the things that we're talking about right now, you're going to go from 10 miles to 5 miles to 4 miles. And when you've got almost 200 miles of road in town, what it ends up doing is you end up falling further and further behind. The roads continue to deteriorate. You're only addressing 2 or 3 miles at a time, and you're really not getting ahead of the problem. And if we can take care of 80% of the issues by doing a mill and an overlay, then I think you're making some very good progress, and you're moving the program forward. And if we follow that up with inspections to take care of any of those reflective cracks that come back, I think you're getting a good product when it's all said and done. My fear is that if we're going to go to these kind of lengths to improve the situation out there, that you're just not going to be able to do very much in terms of road reconstruction, and that I think is going to be a long-term problem as well, because the longer you let these roads go without addressing them, the bigger the issues really develop to. And I think Mr. Katz had talked about issues where you had to reconstruct the road numerous times. Well, what happens is once that pavement fails, it's very difficult to get it to come back. And if you go back and you just saw cut a little area and you put some asphalt in there and pack it down, it's going to last a little while, but it's not going to last very long because you have issues with that base in that location, and that really needs to get addressed in those really worst spots. But the act of us doing the milling operation, putting that tack coat down, and then doing that leveling course helps a lot with a lot of cracks that we see. I would say the majority of the cracks that you see in the pre-done pavement are taken care of. Some of the cracks are going to continue to reflect through, but the majority of them are taken care of through the process that we follow, and that's why we do what we do. And again, the majority of the towns in the state are doing the very same process that we're doing here, with similar results. So.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, seeing no hands. All in favor of calling the question as to item number 3, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Nay. Any abstain? Okay. Motion passes. We will now vote on item number 3 of this evening's agenda. Resolved that in accordance with the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Selectmen recommends that the Town of North Haven appropriate $2 million for the milling and paving of town roadways. The project shall consist of milling and removal of waste materials, paving and materials, installation of manholes and drainage risers, traffic protection, including signage and police and flag personnel. The appropriation may be spent for design, demolition, and construction costs, equipment, furnishings, materials, site improvements, survey costs, architect's fees, engineering fees, other consultants' fees, legal fees, net temporary interest and other financing costs, and other expenses related to the project. And that the town issue bonds or notes and temporary notes in an amount not to exceed $2 million to finance the appropriation. All in favor of item number 3 on the agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Nay. One opposed. Any abstain? Abstain. Okay, the motion passes. So this concludes all items on the special town meeting notice. There being no further lawful business before the special town meeting tonight, I hereby declare the meeting adjourned. The minutes will be available, as well as the public hearing beforehand minutes will be made available by the town clerk as soon as possible. Thanks and good night.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the Town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.